What's going on, guys? Billy here, and DJI just dropped a new version of their goggles. These here are the DJI Goggles Integra, and while they look exactly like the Goggles 2 that released with the Avata, they actually have quite a few differences. Now, this video is solely going to be about the Integra version of the goggles here, but because they are so similar to the Goggles 2, I'll be making comparisons throughout the video to highlight what makes them different. The first of those differences being the price. Despite coming out first, the Goggles 2 are actually more expensive than the Goggles Integra. Whether you're purchasing these goggles standalone or bundled with the Avata, there's a $150 difference in price. DJI also has a V2 set of their larger FPV goggles that are priced even cheaper at $429, but as of now, these are listed as out of stock on their website, so these two goggles seem to be your only option. So let's jump into what these Integra goggles are all about, shall we? The overall design is very slim and lightweight on the face, but I personally am not a huge fan of the included padding around the outside. Yes, it's nice that it's lightweight, but it doesn't provide much relief if you like to wear your goggles really tight against your head. The upgraded foam for my FPV goggles version 2 spoil me when it comes to wearing goggles for longer flying sessions, but it is nice to have this smaller design. I also like the battery that is integrated in the back. The positioning evens out the weight between the front and back side of your head. This also has the same hard padding on the back with a curved design to fit your head. Because the battery is there on the back, there's an integrated wire that runs around the right portion of the headband, but the left side of the headband actually comes apart if you want to quickly put the Goggles Integra on your head or take them off. To get a tighter fit, the portion of the goggles that house the battery have a knob that you can spin to tighten or loosen the headband. It has a super satisfying click as you spin it too, giving this pair of goggles some points for style. Now, the portion of the goggles that sit on the front of your face is pretty much where all of the buttons and controls are. The top side is where your antennas sit, so you can leave them down when carrying them in your bag and flip them up when flying. Underneath of the right antenna, we have our 5D button that allows us to flip through the menus and make selections, as well as a back button to further make our way around the menus. Something interesting I noticed as well is that on the top of the Goggles Integra, there's a loop for a top strap to go over your head and connect to the other top loop on the battery. The Goggles 2 doesn't have this. Now, the sides of the Goggles Integra is somewhat bare. There's not much to be seen, but on the right side, we do have our battery indicator for that internal battery to check how much power we have left. Flipping down to the bottom side of the goggles, we have a USB-C port for updating firmware and charging that battery on board, as well as the power button. So to boot up the goggles, we press once quickly and then hold until we hear a beep. Down on the bottom here, we also have our lens adjusters to change the interpupillary distance. This will slide the pieces that we look through from side to side between 56 and 72 millimeters apart, so that you can properly focus on the single screen display. DJI also decided to put the micro SD card slot right here in between the lenses so that you can record the screen of your goggles. So overall, the Goggles Integra are comfy and give you all the functionality that you need to fly your drone. Personally, I really enjoy having the built-in battery pack here because it's all one piece. I can just put it on, I can turn on the goggles, and then I'm good to go, right? There's no extra setup that I need to do. Everything lives here in one single piece. Now, despite the Integra goggles and the Goggles 2 sharing so much in common, there are some differences that are worth pointing out here about the Goggles 2. The biggest difference has to be the lack of a built-in battery. Instead, you have to use the external Goggles 2 battery that connects through a USB-C cable. Some people just end up attaching their batteries to their head strap, but the built-in battery on the Goggles Integra actually has a larger capacity than the battery that DJI sells to use with the Goggles 2. Now, as I already mentioned, personally, I'm a fan of having the built-in battery in the Goggles Integra just because it's all one piece, easy to throw on, easy to kind of manage here. Whereas with the Goggles 2, you've got the goggles, the wire, as well as the battery pack. But the good thing about this design is you can continue to feed these goggles batteries without having to worry about charging them on the go. So if I have multiple of these batteries, I can just simply take the battery off, throw on a new one, and then I'm good to go. You can, of course, charge the Integra goggles through the USB-C port while you're flying, but then that kind of brings you back to square one, flying with a wire hanging from your head. As for the other notable differences, the Goggles 2 have a headphone jack. They have a touchpad for navigation instead of the 5D button on the Goggles Integra. There's an LED display to show what channel you're on. You can easily remove the antennas from the Goggles 2 to upgrade or change them if you wanted, and the lenses have diopters built in, so you can adjust between positive 2.0 to negative 8.0 and fly without glasses. This, in coordination with being able to move them side to side, makes for a really clear flying experience. If you wear glasses with the Goggles Integra, you'd instead have to get the lenses cut with your prescription, so no changing on the fly as easily. Quickly getting back to the antennas, the Goggles Integra actually have small pieces of rubber that protect the goggles and antennas from rubbing against each other, so this will protect from any scratches. Overall, the weight with the integrated battery really isn't much heavier at all. It only increases by about 100 grams over what the weight of the Goggles 2 is. So while the design between these two goggles is so similar, the way you interact with them is very different. Like the 5D button on the Integra goggles personally is more appealing to me because when I've got my head in the goggles and basically I'm blinded, it's easy to reach up onto the goggles, feel for that tactile button, and then use that tactile button to flip through the menus. Whereas the touchpad here sometimes accidentally gets pressed. Sometimes I hand my goggles to somebody to look at footage and they graze over the touchpad, so that can be a little bit annoying. Again, personally, I enjoy the 5D button, but with the goggles, I really do like the diopter adjustment. Despite having fairly good vision and not wearing glasses, I just feel like it leads to a clearer view of the screen compared to just the interpupillary changes that you can make on the Integra goggles. Now, speaking of the screen, this is another area of difference, but it's nothing major. Both of these pairs of goggles feature a 0.49-inch 1080p 100Hz screen with a peak brightness of 700 nits. The only difference is that the field of view on the Goggles Integra is smaller at 44 degrees compared to the 51-degree field of view on the Goggles 2. This again just kind of comes down to being a personal preference thing. Like to me, I prefer having the tighter field of view on the Goggles Integra because it brings the edges of the frame closer to the center of the screen, therefore allowing me to focus more on the flight that I'm currently in. Now you will get a more immersive, I'll say, experience with the wider field of view on the Goggles 2, but from a utility standpoint, I think that I personally prefer that tighter field of view on the Goggles Integra. Now, what is one thing that everyone dreads having to do with their Avata and Goggles 2? Plug into the phone in order to enable remote ID and establish a connection. Just like plugging in the battery, this is something that made the setup process that much longer with the Goggles 2. With the Goggles Integra though, that is a thing of the past as we have a built-in GPS that handles that connection for you on board. So no more needing to plug in your phone, waiting for the connection to establish, unplugging your phone, putting it away, and then beginning to fly. It's all done within the goggles themselves, both the battery and the GPS, which makes this a much more streamlined set of goggles. So what's our final verdict here, right? We have two sets of goggles that are very identical. Goggles Integra, Goggles 2. And I think that there's two different types of people out there, right? There's someone that's looking to buy their first set of goggles and they're figuring out which one they should choose, right? Or there's somebody that owns the Goggles 2 and wondering, should they upgrade to the Integra goggles? Now here's my standpoint. Integra goggles are far better than Goggles 2. I'm not really sure why they'd price these over the Integra goggles when this offers so much more. I mean, all you're really getting with the Goggles 2 is the wider field of view. You've kind of got this, LED display on the side. You've got the touchpad. You've got the external batteries. But at the end of the day, is that worth an extra $150? To me, no. So Goggles Integra is the way to go. They are my favorite set of goggles right now. So easy to use. The built-in battery makes it so easy to just throw it on and start flying. And so for me, whenever I'm out flying, I'm going to be using the Integra goggles. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the Integra goggles as well as the remote controller 2 or the RC Motion 2. I'll leave my video linked up in the top corner and in the description if you want to check that out. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.